Hey, what's up guys? Ryan from Monkey Fight here, aka Monkey1, and I'm here to show you guys my first Zorga list as well as my thought process as I kept playtesting the deck over time, and my thoughts on certain cards as well as ratio explanations and reasonings, potential cards you should pick up ahead of time because they'll be useful at later dates, and the good and bad matchups for Zorga. Zorga is not a deck that anyone can just pick up and pilot like Bastion is. Zorga is a utility deck that requires tools and options and knowing how to effectively use them in order to progress your game state. So because of the deck inherently being a toolbox deck, I designed this first list with this aspect in mind. I wanted to have as many useful and helpful options as possible to help me in the harder matchups without sacrificing consistency. So first off, we have the ride deck. We got 1 Dream Nibbling, it's the starter. Then we have 1 Rancor Chain, and its ability is on ride, Soul Blast 1, draw 2 cards, then discard a normal order from your hand, and if you can't discard a normal order, then discard 2 cards instead. Rancor Chain allows us to go essentially +1 or net 0 depending on how you look at it. Then we have our grade 2 on the ride line, Black Tears Husk Dragon. Its ability is on ride, add a normal order from your drop zone back to your hand. So you're essentially just going net 0 for the cost for discard. Then we have our grade 3 and our big baddie of the deck, Mysterious Rain Spiritualist Zorga. Next up we have our grade 3s, and I thought a lot about the grade 3 lineup for my first build for Zorga. I had run a lot of playtesting thought processes in my head and scenarios, and this is what I had originally arrived at and what I thought would end up being my final build. First off, we have 3 Zorga, which is standard. Then we have 3 Grief, Despair, and Rejection. I cut this down to 3 from 4 because you need to make more room for the other orders that you want to run in the deck. Then we have 1 Hydronic Ram Dragon, which the reasoning behind it is because Bastion is still a very good deck in the game. So because we run 3 of the Retire order, we need to be able to plus off of it as often as we can. Plus it is generally overall a very good beat stick to have. Then we have 1 Cursed Soul, Squirming, and Agony. Now I had originally thought to run this at 2 in my first build, but I just kept seeing it in hand, so I decided to cut it down to 1 because while it is still a good card, and it combos very well with the next card I'm about to list. Next, we have 3 Regurgitation from the Underworld. Now before I explain why I'm running 3 of this card, I'm going to explain why it combos so well with Cursed Souls. Now all of you should know by now that Cursed Souls, Squirming, and Agony, and Spiritual Body Condensation had a big dispute, and it only gives the 5k to everything if Cursed Souls is the one in the drop zone. So the reason why this card is so good when comboed with Regurgitation is because you essentially get to call a full field off of 1 card, and then everything gains 5k. If Cursed Souls is in the drop zone, while you have Regurgitation in hand, you get to call 4 units and they all gain 5k. Now the reasoning why I'm running Regurgitation at 3 is because it matters so much in the Bruce, Nirvana, and Magnolia matchup. Having spot removal in Zorga is so important and helps the deck so much right now. Zorga is a slow deck, so being able to retire units on your opponent's field makes them slow down to your pace. Now for our grade 2s, we have 2 Nectar of Sensationalism. I went with 2 at first because I thought, card's okay, card's pretty good. I think it's really good. Now I think, oh my god, this is the most important card for Zorga to come out of set 2. Because Zorga's biggest problem is that it is a 3 attack deck with no way of dealing extra damage aside from drive checking and critical trigger. And this order fixes that problem by so much. Giving the rearguard plus 15k and a crit make Zorga that much more threatening of a deck. Because being able to swing with big numbers consistently and then hitting for extra damage puts this deck much higher than anyone else would think. Next up, we have 2 Ghost Chase. Now, some people have been cutting Ghost Chase because they want to have more options, they want to run more Hendrina, or they want to run more beaters, or they just want to run more orders to help them. But I think Ghost Chase is still an insanely stupid card, and it's really good. Being able to bounce Persona Rides, triggers, the over trigger, PGs, back to your hand is way too good to pass up, because a lot of times the difference between winning and losing a game will be, man, if only I still had Ghost Chase. I could have bounced my over trigger back to my hand, guarded, and won the game next turn. Next up, I'm running 2 Fleet Swallower, aka Shark Boy, because his skill is way too good, even though I don't like his cost. Now, quick explanation as to why I don't like his cost is because it's a Soul Blast 1 in a deck that inherently can Soul Blast a lot in one turn. But I'm okay with it because his effect is, if you Alchemagic an order this turn, when this unit attacks, cost Soul Blast 1, your opponent must drop 2 cards to the Guardian Circle, and this unit gains 5k. That ability makes this grade 2 the best beater in the deck that Zorga has. Next up, we have 3 Inheritance Maiden Hendrina. Now, just because I'm running this card at 3 does not mean I'm undermining the importance of this card at all. This card is super important for Zorga. Being able to reduce the Soul Blast cost for your Alchemagic is very, very important, because Zorga is a very, very cost heavy deck. Next up, we have our grade 1s. So obviously we're gonna run for Planar Prevent Dragon, which is the good PG for Storkea. No explanation needed, it's the good PG, you run 4 of it no matter what. Next up, we have 4 Rogue Headhunter. Now, Rogue Headhunter is the most important unit to come out of set 2 for Zorga. Its skill is on place whenever you would Alchemagic an order this turn, reduce the Counterblast cost by 1. You can make Grief, Despair, and Rejection 0 Counterblast. You can make Regurgitation just a Soul Blast. This card also gains 5k if you would play an order this turn, so it's a 13k beater by itself. This card helps make numbers and make your Alchemagic turns a lot easier. You should be running 4 of this because you need to see this card as often as you can and as many times as you can. Next up, we got 1 Spiritual Body Condensation. This card is still a good card, it's just not as good as Regurgitation from the Underworld. Sure, it's low Soul Blast cost, so last 1. And then it can call whatever you want from the drop zone, and it gains 5k. That's good, but yeah, that's pretty good. But it only calls 1 card, and the 5k just isn't that important. But because I wanted to make the deck as toolboxy as possible, I decided to still run it, and so far, it worked out well for me. Next up, we have 1 Sleeve Tugging Belle. Now this card, I can't stress this enough. This card is very, very good for late game. Being able to recur the orders from your bind zone back to your drop zone so you can use them again and have the options is very, very important. Being able to decide which order you want to use late game makes Zorga a very, very skill intensive deck. So this card, while it helps with order recursion, it can also be a fairly big beat stick by itself, because it gains 5k for each card you put back in your bind zone. Next up for our trigger lineup, we got 7 crits, 4 heals, 4 of the 20k front trigger, and then 1 over trigger. Now, I've seen people run 8 crit and 3 of the front trigger, and that's fine, you can do that, 100%, nothing wrong with it. Personally, I prefer to have more shield value in hand, because Zorga inherently has less guard value than some of the other decks in the format. Zorga can have a big hand sometimes, but it's all smoke and mirrors, because a lot of times they'll have like 8 to 9 cards in hand, but 2 to 3 cards of that are orders that don't have guard value. So that extra 5k shield matters a lot. Now we're on to what I would say would be the most interesting part of the video, where I'm going to be explaining what cards you should look out for and what cards you should pick up so you can have them ahead of time. Overcoming the Unnatural Death is a very good card. It's a very good card, but unfortunately it makes your Alchemagic turns very, very weak. It's Counterblast 1, bind this order, and then choose up to 2 orders from your drop zone and add them to your hand. And that's great. It adds 2 orders from your drop zone to your hand. That's more order recursion that the deck needs to see. So this card could be very, very useful later on in the game for Zorga. But for right now, if you do run this card, it's only as a one-of. You don't want to run this card at more than 1 right now, but I would say still pick it up just in case. Next up, if you don't already have this card, sleeve Tugging Belle. As I explained before, its skill is on place, put all of the cards in your bind zone back into your drop zone, and it gains 5k for each one. It's amazing order recursion, it's a unit on field that swings for a big number, and it helps you finish and close games. This card is very good, and I can only see this card gaining more and more value as the game goes on for Zorga. Next up, we have Spurring Maiden Elenia. Elenia is not a big card to pick up, but it is a okay card. If you want to be more rush focused on your grade 2 turn, it is a fantastic card to pick up for you then. So if I were you, I would pick up a couple copies just ahead of time. Next up, we have this beautiful card, Sylvan Horned Beast Kusi. Now, I know what you're thinking. Kusi, why Kusi? This card's weird. If you do pick up Kusi and you're playing Zorga, pick up 1 to 2 copies, because I promise you, you will mill this card and it will be a fantastic booster behind your Vanguard. For your vanilla Alchemagic turns where you can't use Grief, Despair, and Rejection, or you didn't Persona Ride, and you're stuck with using, per se, Regurgitation and the 15k in a crit order, Nectar of Sensations. This card is fantastic for boosting your Vanguard and making it a relevant number, so your opponent has to drop more cards from hand. So I would say that this card is fantastic. It is a great pickup ahead of time. So go on and pick up a couple copies, because this card will only gain more value because it is a big, big booster. Now for the good matchups for Zorga. For Zorga, the best matchup you can possibly have is Nirvana. Nirvana is the most fun, yet also the most winnable matchup for Zorga. Nirvana usually wants to have an Overdress unit on field, which is great for you, because you get to retire that unit. Per se, the Urger, the Arcs, the regular Verena, or the Valiente. And because you're able to retire them with Regurgitation from the Underworld, this makes Nirvana a really, really good matchup for Zorga. Next up, we have Bastion. Now I know what you're thinking, Bastion is like a top 3 or 4 deck. Why does Zorga, again, have a good matchup into a top 3 or 4 deck? Well, the reasoning is because Bastion's hand is all smoke and mirrors. They will on average have 4 to 6 triggers in hand, as well as at least 1 perfect guard. Zorga can blow through that in 1 turn. Bastion cannot survive for more than 2 to 3 Zorga turns, because after turn 4, Zorga starts swinging with a crit. At that point, Bastion becomes a very easy and winnable matchup. Next, we have Bruce. Now, I know what you're thinking, again, why would Zorga have a really good matchup going into Bruce, the like tier 0 deck of the format? Well, let me explain. Zorga is able to retire Leonard consistently and plus off of it. The second Leonard is gone, Bruce is no longer a set 2 deck. It is no longer a tier 0 deck. Bruce falls to the same level as Zorga. You are on an equal playing field once you get Leonard off the field. And at that point, you're going to make Bastion drop a lot of pieces from hand that they want to keep in order to use during their turns. Even if they do manage to keep a couple of pieces for the next turn, Zorga 100% will be able to live at least 2 final rush turns. So at that point, Bruce is just dead in the water. Now for the worst matchups for Zorga. The worst matchup Zorga could ever possibly have is Prison. Prison is the worst and hardest matchup for Zorga. It is very annoying and mind draining to play against. If you're playing Zorga against Prison, you don't get to do your usual Alchemagic shenanigans. You have to play the game very slowly, and you have to not commit the field. You can only ever have 3 units on field. Best scenario, you only want to ever have 2 on field. And they have to be attacking units. There's not much else I could say. Zorga can't build a free field without Prison benefiting off it. The next worst matchup for Zorga is, unfortunately, Orphist. Orphist has a very strong grade 2 turn. Zorga does not like strong grade 2 turns. Orphist is another big beater deck. It swings for big numbers consistently every turn, and it's not great for Zorga because just like Bastion, your hand is all smoke and mirrors. You're gonna have orders in hand that you can't use, that you can't guard with, and your 8 to 9 card hand is realistically 6 to 7 cards. That was it, guys. Hope you enjoyed watching my Zorga deck list. And until next time, monkey out.